live drive introduction to myself. If you are a new viewer, I am the Rumble Right Dad. I created this channel in order to promote a future of fatherhood in America. And while I'm attempting to do that, I'm also celebrating this day 19 years of sobriety from alcohol and other drugs. And it was a complete and utter miracle that I was able to enter into sobriety because I was an enemy of God. I was against everything that had to do with scripture, biblical knowledge, knowledge of Christianity. And I ended up in a complete and utter hole because of my sin, because of the way that I had done my drug use and alcohol use had started when I was age 12 and ran until I was age 23. I began using drugs and alcohol because I ultimately was anxious, unsure of myself, incapable of growing in ways to deal with my anxiety as a young person. And so I stopped trying to care for that. I stopped caring about sports or other things, and I began using drugs at age 12. And from the age of 12 onward, I used every type of drug that you can imagine. I never stopped using from more than a day or 2 days at a time. And my parents were very strict. So I was grown up in a secular household, pretty much a liberal household, and my parents did not allow us really to have too many friends. We weren't allowed to stay out late, not too late. I have an older brother who basically introduced me to smoking marijuana. The first buzz I ever got was when I put a dip in my mouth at age 12, and it was magical. And as soon as I did it, I wanted to feel that way for as many days as I possibly could. So I began eating acid at school. I did a lot of my drug use at school because that was the place where I had the most freedom. So during school, I would drop hits of acid, put them in my eyes, and trip out. People would say, I looked a certain way, but ultimately I was doing it in some instances for clout because I knew so little about who I was. I knew so little about how to deal with my anxiety that I thought it was my new identity. So I grew my hair long. I had all of the symbols that I was doing drugs, selling drugs. So I began selling drugs at an early age, selling things like ecstasy and meth when it was new to the market here in the Midwest. It felt new. And at that time, we were going to raves and doing other things like that. And as I sold drugs, I began getting caught. And when you're a juvenile, of course, and you get caught, you don't really have much of a consequence. So I would go to the police station. They would question me about stuff and then let me go back to my parents, where I entered into counseling and started going to AA meetings when I was 14. And when you're 14, sitting with 60-year-olds who say that they have problems with chronically touching themselves, and that's why they were in meetings, I felt obviously out of the mix, obviously not one of them. So I stopped going to meetings. I sort of made fun of them. I declared that I was sober for 5 minutes and got out of trouble, and then I would go right back to using. So I used up until my parents got divorced when I turned 18, and then decided to chase my scholarship, which I had still maintained pretty good grades, but I chased my scholarship for about 15 minutes until I used meth so frequently that I'd stay up days at a time, and when I would go to class, I'd see the board swirling in front of me and start hallucinating, and then ultimately I just dropped out because I just couldn't. So I went to work in the family stone mill, and I started acquiring DUIs. So I got the first one at age 18, the second one at age 21. And at that time, hi Lily, hi meth, sounds wild, magic beans, you're correct, meth is not great, wouldn't recommend. Hi to everyone in the chat, so thank you for coming. So when I was using meth day over day, I started to have delusions where I thought people were out to get me. My brother was sleeping with a girl that I liked, which all of that may have been true, And there may have been conspiracies against me, but still to this day, even 19 years later, I have no idea what was true and what was false about what I was going through. I really pushed my brother away from me because of what I had been experiencing. Thank you, Jay Noons. Yeah, I'm sober 7 months. Congratulations to you. That is excellent. I need to let this cab go. You're absolutely right. It is tired. It's very tired, like I am, father of 4 now. So discussing how I ended up getting sober, I went to the psychiatric ward when I was 20, and because I had thought I was going to take my life. And I was rescued by God that day because I was out in the woods. I was getting ready to do the deed, and the police pulled up. Somehow they knew I was a mile back in the woods in this specific spot, and I was rescued from myself that night from certain death, because I promise you I was taking my life, and it wasn't just like a dog and pony show to try to get attention or anything like that. So I got arrested and I went to the psych ward, and when I went to the psych ward, I was treated so poorly, and doctors would see you for 5 minutes and then compel the nurses to keep you for another 15, 20 days. And I recognized quickly that I didn't belong there. And I said to myself, if I get out of this, thank you, Magic Beans. Thank you so much. I'll keep going. So if I get my way out of the psych ward and out of this trouble, I'm going to try to change the system, because the system was so broken and it was doing so much dirt to people that were in there, and people were suffering. So I got out. I tried to quit using. I lasted about 4 days, and naturally to myself I said, well, alcohol probably wouldn't hurt, cannabis probably wouldn't hurt, those things aren't really that bad. So I started doing those, and I found myself within a month crossing all the boundaries that you promise yourself you're not going to cross when you start using, like smoking crack, using jabs, doing heroin, which at that time was really, really stigmatized against, even among people who use drugs. So I did all the things, hanging out in places where I knew I could get killed, seeing kilos and having problems, trying to move drugs and things like that. So I crossed all the boundaries, and I became really suicidal, and basically, lived my entirety of my life like I wasn't going to make it very long. So I got my third OVI. It was a Friday night. I was passed out behind the wheel off of alcohol and opiates, and I wrecked into a parked car on the side of the road about a mile from my house, which was a miracle because I had been driving on country roads, going places that I should have not made it, and I ended up wrecking into a parked car on the side of the road. And I knew when they put the handcuffs on me that this was basically a wrap, because 3 DUIs in 5 years in Ohio is like prison time. So they put the handcuffs on me, and I went to jail this time, and this time I was the person with the worst charges in the holding cell. I was the person where other people were like, oh, I don't know if you're going to get out. So after the weekend, my dad came and saw me, and he brought his attorney, and we went before the judge, and he said, you're a menace to society, and if I let you out, you better go to treatment, you better stay sober, and I might not give you a year in prison. So I went out of that jail that day, saw the wrecked car, walked home, and ended up, I put my marijuana to the side that day and said, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to quit for good, but I'm going to quit for now. And I started going to AA meetings again, and I started hearing from old people who were basically telling my story. And this time around, thoughts on quitting drugs, do it. It will absolutely change your life. I mean, it changed mine so much for the better, and I'm going to get to the miracles that happened afterwards. Shout out to you, El Pisto Negro. That is a interesting handle. You must be from a Latin country, I'm guessing. So in any case, I went to AA meetings, and they were telling my story, and I heard men this time for the first time really with respect, knowing that I could do this too. I could make a life without drugs and alcohol, and I was 23. So hi, Matthew Conrick, nice to have you in the chat, or maybe it's Conrich. So I was absolutely astonished at how the springtime was unfolding, because it was March 11th of 2006. So I went to treatment that year, and I recognized that I needed something more than just what I was operating on. I didn't want to talk to God. I didn't want to ask God for forgiveness. I didn't want to come to him, because ultimately I knew if he was around and had been watching me, he knew, yo, Path to Prevail, thank you for coming. He knew how bad of a person I had been behaving like. And if he had been watching me, why would he rescue me? Because I basically slandered him. I slammed God every time I got the chance. I told Christians they should go to hell. And I was the worst in accordance with any relationship to a higher power. So when I went to treatment and I knew I was about to bounce because it was so bad in treatment, I went in there, and ultimately I prayed on my knees the third day that God would do something to rescue me, because I could not do this myself. And so, hey, shout out to Path to Prevail. There you are. Thank you for coming. So I prayed, and immediately following that, God lifted the weight off my shoulders, and great things began to unfold before my eyes. I saw that everybody else needed this, not just me. Everybody else that I was in treatment with, coming out of prison, there for the 6th time, they needed God. And even though I had no idea truthfully who God was, that was my new mission. So I went back to AA meetings. I stayed sober that year, went back to, church, and trying to figure out whether that was something for me or not. And I remember distinctly about 7 months into my sobriety, I was in church, and they started playing Amazing Grace, and I realized that I was the recipient of grace. That was the difference, that I couldn't understand why God would rescue me. And it's not because I was anything worth rescuing. It was because of him. It was because of the grace that was embedded in a relationship with his son, Jesus Christ. And so I began to take that in. And as I did, shortly thereafter, maybe a year later, I began becoming an international missionary to the country of Zambia, where we taught people with HIV how to have businesses of their own, and really pool their money together so that they didn't need to go to the banking system. And when I had visited there, I saw people in such immense poverty, without windows, without doors in their homes, without barely a roof over their head, no running water, no electricity, pooping outside of the house, and having HIV, who still had joy in the climb that they were attempting to do. They still had communion and company with one another in meaningful ways. And so I saw the way that America was richly blessed, and the way that I could use that to try to influence, the pressing forward of God's kingdom among the nations. So, yeah, thank you for the comments. What is this? Hey, this is my story of why I got sober and what happened afterwards. So, after I get home from being a missionary, I needed back surgery. So I decided to go back to school instead of working in the stone mill, which is where I went to work at Chick-fil-A, because of all places, they were off on Sunday. It didn't pay for squat, but I did see a woman there. She was 7 years younger than me. She was beautiful, had blue eyes, blonde hair, and was really peaceful in her spirit, which wasn't something that I was used to in women at all that I had been seeing. So I was like, well, I'm 7 years older than her. I probably really don't have a chance, but let me just try. I'll shoot my shot. So I shot my shot at her, and she went on a date with me, super quiet, didn't hardly say anything, but that left a mystery. And so I wanted to find out more. And as a man who now has 3 daughters, I can say very, very acutely that if a woman leaves mystery embedded in their conversations with you, that makes them so much more attractive. So I continued to try to date her. And by the time I got to 6 months in to our dating, I knew that this was the woman I wanted. She also had a family that still met together on Sundays, still had, the best family structure that I had ever been witness to. And coming from a divorced family, I knew that that's something that I wanted. So I asked her to marry me. That was about 10 years ago. And I thought that I knew what I was doing, but that changed my life completely. I ended up being a leader in the church a little bit, where I had been going and leading a house church and things like that, and meeting some some of the greatest people that I'd ever met, even throughout my travels to India and Zambia and all these other continents. So as we began our lives together almost 11 years ago, she brought a peace into my life, but also an understanding that when I mess up, it messes up more than just me. And I ultimately wish I could say that our marriage has been perfect and that I've taken my conduct from my ability to get sober completely into our marriage. But, you know, I've still had consequences. I've had mess ups. You know, there have been times where we really struggled. But we began having children, and I have an 8-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old son, a 3-year-old daughter, and now a 5-week-old baby girl. And that, more than anything, gave me a persistence, the ability to press forward, even with everything that I had done before. The greatest accomplishment and the greatest motivation that I've ever experienced was becoming a father. And God has so richly blessed me in that once we started having kids, we saw that no one else other than the church that we were going to was having kids. You know, throughout COVID, people were scared, and we said, God has been faithful to us. We're going to be faithful to try to raise children that are good and in a world that's broken. So we kept having them, and this is our 4th. You should be too busy to struggle with sobriety. I don't struggle with my sobriety. I've struggled in many other ways because I'm a broken person, but I've never relapsed over the last 19 years. So that's why today is my 19-year anniversary. And having 3 daughters and a son, I've never once drank or drugged since 19 years ago. So yeah, no struggles here, at least not in that way. If I cared about my kids, I wouldn't endanger myself by reading comments while driving. Might be true. Thank you for that. I appreciate the feedback. So in any case, the reason I'm doing this while I'm driving is because I have no other time. So, you know, I guess, yeah, you're probably right. But in any case, so my children were the greatest gift. And we actually lost a son to a stillbirth about 18 months ago. And that was the hardest part of my entire life. Even though by far my sobriety, all the difficult things that I'd been through, you know, they're ultimately the loss of our son, who I still grieve, was the most difficult part of our marriage, the most difficult part of my life by far. And that time was the most pressing. But our marriage, our family grew ever closer through that. And that's the way that trauma, which I hate that term, even though I'm a counselor, trauma is such a ridiculously overused term. But I've watched the doctors pull my dead son out of my mother, or out of my wife, you know, about 18 months ago. And there is no more difficult thing for a man to see that I can be aware of, other than one of their children being hurt, you know, severely hurt in their presence. And when we went through that, everyone around us has been so gracious, and God has given us another baby girl after that as just a sign of his fortitude, his desire to serve us and to give us what is good. And ultimately I came to peace with the loss of my son because I knew that God was holding him first. And while I would have loved the chance to protect and watch over him, I know that being a man myself, and all the possibilities of what could happen if a boy enters into a broken world. And I may have not been able to hold him, but he won't have to make some of the same mistakes I did. And he got to go to God first, and that's a good thing. I'll meet him someday soon when I pass. So having children, being married has been an entire crazy experience. But I've run treatment centers. I've worked in substance use treatment since I became a counselor about 12 years ago. And I've been the director of treatment centers. I've directed housing for sober living. I've worked with probably multiple thousands of men. I've had tens of thousands of hours of therapy that I've given forth to men and women in drug treatment as well as mental health treatment. And I've become a little bit more conservative in my view about what good therapy is. I think the industry's fairly broken, and I've been recently writing my legislators about all of the things that have to do with that. If God gave you my daughter, why did he take my most recent son? That's a difficult question. I don't know God's ways. He's higher than mine. And so ultimately it's really difficult to say. And you do question God. You question, like, what did he need my son for? Why did he give us that pregnancy in the first place if God was going to take it away, before he was even born? It's a really difficult question. But why ultimately we suffer is because it's better in the long run if we know suffering in order that we can know the goodness of God. Because if everything were even keeled and temperate and perfect all the time, there would be no escalation to God when things were good. There would be no desire for heaven. And ultimately, I look forward to heaven, not just to meet Jesus, but to meet my son, who I never got to hold. So I can't answer the question why God would take my son, but it's definitely been something that's been on my mind, just being candid and honest with you. So why I started this channel comes out through all that. Having been a therapist, I saw men getting stomped on. I saw the difficulties that children were going through after they were isolated during COVID. I saw that the political climate was as such that people needed something. And this is going to be, a channel that's attempting to uplift fathers. And my sobriety has a lot to do with that. But without my sobriety, without that one choice, whether it was forced or not, that without that one choice, I would not have these 4 beautiful children and not have the one child who's in heaven today. Those things came out of that one small decision to try to get sober. And without that, everything would be different. So I'm so graced to have all of your support. Thank you. Thanks for the encouragement for those of you who did encourage. And why exist at all then? It's so that we can glorify God and honor him in all that we do. That's my personal opinion. So, to each their own. I would never force anyone to believe that on my behalf or on their own behalf, but that's my personal opinion. So God bless you all. Thank you for celebrating 19 years of sobriety with me. I appreciate so much the following and anyone who commented. If I missed you, thank you so much. Have a great day. I appreciate it.